Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Lerina Bright, and I'm the Executive Director of Mission 89, which is a Geneva-based NGO that is the only organization in the world exclusively dedicated to combating trafficking in, through, and around sport. I serve on the Safe Sport Commission of the Council of Europe, on Interpol's Human Trafficking Expert Group. I chair the Integrity Commission of the World Baseball Softball Confederation, and I sit on FIFA's expert group on safeguarding. So FIFA safeguarding expert working group, that is. It is in that capacity, in the context of the FIFA 2026 World Cup, that I'm particularly honored to be contributing to the series, which is being produced by Professor Dr. Rosa Patti and the John J. Brunetti Human Trafficking Academy at St. Thomas University. The presentation is titled Beyond the Game, because the story I want to tell today goes beyond the pitch. It goes beyond the stands. It goes beyond the thrill of a tournament. It is about the lives of young athletes, their dreams, their vulnerabilities, and above all, their rights to be protected. It's about what sport can be when we hold it to the standard that it deserves. We have about 30 minutes together. I will take you through a definition, a framework, a body of evidence, a threat assessment, and a set of concrete actions. By the end, I hope you will see sport trafficking not as an abstract policy issue, but as a real, documented, and solvable challenge that sits squarely within the domain of law, academia, and international advocacy. So let's begin. Here is how we will move through this material. And on the side will be the PowerPoint presentation, or that will also be made available to you as well. But we will be starting with a definition, which is grounded in everything Palermo Protocol related, and it establishes what we mean when we talk about sport trafficking. We will then explore the three dimensions of how trafficking manifests in and around sport. From there, we will move to the FIFA 2026 World Cup specifically, examining the risk landscape across the three host nations. We will be drawing on the evidence base from the Mission 89's Global Thematic Report on Sport Trafficking, which is the first comprehensive scholarly study of this issue that's ever been produced. We will be looking at prevention in action, what works and why community-based education matters. And we will close with a call to action directed specifically at this audience of legal scholars, practitioners, academics, and those in the anti-trafficking field. Before we go further, let me first introduce Mission 89, because the work I will be drawing from today is grounded in our institution's research and programming. Mission 89 was established in 2017, so it's quite a young organization. We're registered in Geneva, Switzerland, and also in Brussels, in Washington, D.C., and in Lagos, Nigeria. Our entire mandate is sport trafficking, with a primary focus on children. We do nothing else. Our work is sitting across three pillars: research, education, and advocacy. As I mentioned earlier, we produced the Global Thematic Report on Sport Trafficking in partnership with Loughborough University and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association UK. This is the world's first and only comprehensive scholarly study to define sport trafficking, map its typologies, and also establish an evidence base. Education is another way that we work to tackle this issue. Currently, we're running the Youth Ambassador Program, or YAP as it's called, and this trains young people between the ages of 16 and 19 as certified peer educators and community advocates. YAP is currently active in the United States, in Mexico, and in Canada. And in a couple of weeks, we hope that it will also be activated in Uruguay and Nigeria. I will note, though, that Nigeria is not a participating nation, as you football lovers out there, including myself, know. But it is one of the most significant countries of origin for young athletes in the global football ecosystem, and that is precisely why their protection matters to us. Advocacy is where we have shown greater strength as an organization. We contributed to UN General Assembly Resolution 78/228, which formally recognized sport trafficking as a concern requiring dedicated international attention. We have collaborated in the past with Interpol on developing a purple notice specific to trafficking around sport. We have served as a witness at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, as well as the European, and submitted evidence to the European Union. We sit, as I mentioned, on FIFA's Safeguarding Expert Working Group. We are a small organization with an outsized mandate, and I'm hoping personally that by the end of this session, you will be joining us on this march. And we carry this issue with all the urgency that it deserves. Defining sport trafficking. Before we can define sport trafficking, it's important that I mention that the legal basis of that definition is founded in Article 3 of the UN Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, more commonly known as the Palermo Protocol, which was adopted in the year 2000. The protocol defines trafficking as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability for the purpose of exploitation. Now, the three elements in the definition that are critical: the act, the means, and the purpose. So the act is what the trafficker does, right? So the trafficker recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, or receives a person. The means is how they do it. That's through force, through fraud, coercion, deception, or the abuse of power over someone who is vulnerable. The purpose here is exploitation, which includes or can include sexual exploitation, forced labor, organ removal, and servitude. All three elements must be present for an act to constitute trafficking. And this is so important, and this is why sometimes proving that it's a case of trafficking is so difficult, because all these three elements need to be present. And when we apply this framework to sport, we find that it maps with just absolute alarming precision, right? So what does it mean to apply this framework to sport? Let me give you two examples, one from West Africa and one closer to home. When a scout recruits a 15-year-old from a rural village in Senegal with a false promise of a professional contract, that is the act of recruitment. When that child arrives in Europe to find that there's no contract, no school, and no way back home, the scout has used fraud and has exploited the position of vulnerability of that young 15-year-old. And when that child is furthermore forced to work unpaid as a domestic servant in the agent's household or elsewhere, that is the purpose, forced labor, and that is trafficking. Closer to home, when a young girl in the United States is recruited into a gymnastics program by a coach who uses his position of authority to sexually exploit her over several years, the recruitment into the sport was the act, right? The abuse of power was the means, and the sexual exploitation was the purpose. That is also trafficking, not abuse alone, that is trafficking. These are not hypotheticals that we're describing. Both patterns are documented in the Global Thematic Report and in criminal cases, some of which I'm sure you're familiar with, across jurisdictions. Mission 89 proposes the following working definition. Sport trafficking is defined as the recruitment, the transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons through force, fraud, or coercion for exploitation within, through, or around sporting contexts. Now, it's important to note that for child trafficking, that is for victims that are children, the Palermo Protocol removes the requirement to prove the means, which is what that means is that if the victim is 18 years, is younger than 18, the act and the purpose alone will constitute trafficking. So irrespective of whether force was used, whether fraud was used, or whether they were coerced, whether those elements, that aspect can be demonstrated, it constitutes trafficking. So this is a critical legal provision for the sport context, because as you can well imagine, many of the victims are minors, and where the means of coercion sometimes can be very subtle. And those nuances would point to the power of a coach, the hope of a contract, the fear of losing a scholarship. The definition, I should add, and I cannot emphasize that strongly enough, is that the definition is drawn directly from and is fully consistent with the Palermo Protocol, as you probably would have observed already. Now, let's talk about the 3 dimensions of trafficking. Our Global Thematic Report identifies a tripartite framework for understanding sport trafficking. 3 distinct but interconnected contexts in sport. And we're talking about trafficking through sport, trafficking around sport, and trafficking in sport. So normally the flow is trafficking in sport, trafficking through sport, and trafficking around sport. Trafficking in sport refers to exploitation that is occurring within the sporting structure, within the sporting ecosystem itself. This is what most people would associate with the issue, right? Though it remains severely under-recognized. It includes the fraudulent recruitment and transfer of athletes, particularly children and young people, from the global south on false pretenses to academies or clubs in wealthier countries. Documents are confiscated, freedom is restricted, education denied, and these are actually documented cases. So again, these are not hypotheticals. It includes or can include exploitative contracts where agents control the athletes' earnings, their image, their commercial rights, often requiring them to sign documents that they cannot even read, that they do not understand, in a language that they do not speak. So they're essentially surrendering their rights, rights that they did not even know that they had, okay? And it also includes debt bondage through those same agent relationships where athletes are made to believe that they owe for travel, accommodation, training fees. Debts that can never actually be repaid, and that keep the athlete in a state of perpetual economic servitude. Trafficking in sport also includes exploitation of migrant athletes who, far away from home, without the language skills, without the legal status or knowledge of it, are among the most vulnerable people in the sports system. And it includes, critically, the sexual exploitation of young athletes by coaches and trainers, cases where the sports structure provides this access to the athletes and then furthermore enables and then conceals these cases. So football accounts for the majority of documented cases, but we see this across gymnastics, athletics, taekwondo, baseball, combat sports, taekwondo is a combat sport, cycling, and beyond. There's also the second form of the second dimension of sport trafficking, which is trafficking that happens through sport. Trafficking through sport refers to sport being used as a vehicle for trafficking that ultimately has nothing to do with athletic competition. So basically, there is no athletic opportunity. There is no opportunity in sport at all. It's just an opportunity that is being dangled in order to traffic this young aspiring athlete. And this is perhaps the most insidious dimension. It includes fraudulent sports scholarships, which are used to recruit young people into the United States or Europe, not for education, but rather for exploitation on arrival. It includes sporting events, and when sporting events are used as a logistic corridor, right, where the movement of thousands of people, the demand for accommodation and services, and the temporary strain on border control systems is now creating ideal conditions for traffickers to move people with reduced risk of detection. It also includes club structures using club structures that are being used as fronts rather for criminal networks, right? So where it's a legitimate registered sport organization, but it's being used, for example, to launder money or to harbor trafficking victims. And trafficking through sport would also include that digital dimension, by the way, which would be the online platforms, the gaming ecosystems, and social media when it's used to identify, groom, and recruit vulnerable young athletes. Finally, let's talk about trafficking around sport. Trafficking around sport is the dimension that receives the most public attention and also, in some respects, probably the most distorted coverage. It refers to exploitation that is linked to the economy and social environment created by sporting events. This includes the risk of sexual exploitation near major event venues where the concentration of travelers creates a demand, right, for commercial sexual services that in many cases is being met through trafficking. It also includes forced labor in event construction, stadium builders, infrastructure workers, hospitality staff, particularly in the context where labor protections rather are weak and oversight is minimal. It includes, furthermore, it also includes the vulnerability of informal vendors, which would include street workers and community members who live near these major venues and whose existing precarity, one would say, is intensified by the sudden concentrated demand of a mega event. Now I want to be precise here because it appears to be a political issue or conversation in certain jurisdictions, but I need to make it clear that the evidence on event-related trafficking is nuanced, right? So some research suggests that the major sporting events do not automatically produce a dramatic spike in trafficking. What the evidence does show consistently, though, is that existing vulnerabilities are concentrated, they're accelerated and made visible around these events. So the World Cup in itself is not creating trafficking, right? The risk is not created from nothing. It is amplified from what already exists. And that is precisely why then prevention, prevention before, during, and after the event is imperative. It should not only be enforcement during the event, that should not be the only response to tackling this issue. So this brings us then to FIFA 2026. The 2026 World Cup will be the largest in the tournament's history. There are 48 teams. There are 16 host cities and over 500 million ticket requests were received from fans all over the world. Okay, 3 nations: the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And very soon, as of June 11th, 2026, it begins. So what I'd like to do now is to give you a brief risk profile of each host nation through the lens of sport trafficking. And let's begin with the United States. So the United States is the world's largest labor trafficking destination. It is also a major destination country for sexual exploitation. And with 11 host cities, including high trafficking corridors such as Miami, New York, Los Angeles, and Houston, the geographic footprint of this tournament intersects directly with known trafficking infrastructure. 17 US senators in a bipartisan letter, very important to underscore, sent a letter to FIFA in March 2025, specifically urging that the organization take concrete steps to prevent trafficking around the tournament. And so the question is not whether the risk exists, the question is whether the response is actually adequate. Mission 89 is activating its Youth Ambassador program across multiple US cities, communities, training young people in prevention advocates as prevention advocates on the ground. Canada presents a different profile, different scenario, but no less serious, because Canada experiences significant internal trafficking between provinces already. There are also cases of Indigenous women and girls that are being disproportionately represented among detected victims, which is a persistent structural injustice that a major sporting event such as the World Cup risks exacerbating, right? So Toronto and Vancouver, both host cities, are documented trafficking hubs. That's a fact. Mission 89 will be partnering with universities and civil society organizations in Canada to ensure that the YAP program reaches young people at risk in these communities. Mexico. So Mexico is simultaneously a major country of origin, transit, and destination for trafficking victims, right? So the intersection of organized crime networks with sport event ecosystem is a documented and serious risk. Host cities such as Guadalajara and Monterrey, both in states with significant trafficking activity, would require particular attention. Mission 89's YAP activation in Monterrey was developed in partnership with Tecnológico de Monterrey, and it's already underway, and that will be building prevention capacity from the ground up. So to be clear, the World Cup itself does not create trafficking, but it certainly creates conditions of travel, of demand, of economic opportunity, and enforcement strain. And I think there's nobody that is listening today that would disagree with that. And that can be exploited by those who are already in the business of exploiting people. So our role is to build protective environments before those conditions converge. So now I would like to move on to the evidence base. In December 2024, again, Mission 89 partnered with Loughborough University in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to publish this GTRST, the Global Thematic Report. This report maps global typologies. It also proposes a research and policy agenda. And most importantly, or depending on how you view it, the study defined sport trafficking as a distinct phenomenon. So the first, what I'd like to do now is to share with you 6 key findings from the report because they're directly relevant to the legal scholars and academics that will be watching this series. Finding 1, the research gap. Sport trafficking is severely under-researched. It does not exist as a distinct category in most crime databases. Cases are misclassified, as you can very well imagine, as smuggling, as labor violations, or as child abuse. And the sport connection is rarely recorded. This invisibility is not accidental, dare I say, it is structural. The second finding is that child athletes are disproportionately vulnerable. Children in sport academies, in training centers, particularly in football, in gymnastics, athletics, they face heightened risks, right? The average age of victims that are documented fall between 15 and 19 years old, and most are cross-border migrants. These are the cases that are documented. It is important to note, however, that these figures reflect detected and again documented cases. So a fraction, and so normally we can imagine reasonably that a fraction of the real picture, given that the severe reporting gap identified in the global thematic report itself. So we imagine that it's even greater. So the combination of age, displacement, aspiration, and power asymmetry is precisely the profile that traffickers are actually targeting. And so I would like to situate this within the broader global context. So UNODC's 2024 Global report on trafficking in persons recorded a 31% increase in detected child victims between 2019 and 2022. Children now represent 38% of all detected trafficking victims globally, a figure that was confirmed by the UNODC's Executive Director, Ghada Wali, at the report's launch. Okay, so this is the environment in which sport trafficking is happening. Finding 3, mega events create concentrated risk. We heard this before. FIFA World Cups, the Olympic Games, Super Bowls, World Series, and similar events create temporary concentrations of exploitation risk across all 3 dimensions we have discussed, okay? So the convergence of people, of money, of demand, and enforcement strain is a combination that opportunistic people, criminals, to be specific, are exploiting. Finding 4, the digital threat is accelerating. Online recruitment via social media, gaming platforms has dramatically expanded the reach of traffickers targeting young athletes, particularly during COVID and post-COVID. A 16-year-old with a dream of a professional contract is extraordinarily vulnerable to a recruiter who approaches them online with a credible offer that to them means a profile photo, a club crest, and a promise. Okay. Finding 5, the governance gap. At the time of the GTRST's publication, the majority of international sport federations did not have explicit anti-trafficking provisions in their safeguarding frameworks. They had child protection policies, they had anti-doping rules, but the specific nexus between trafficking and sport, that is largely absent from governance documents. FIFA, to its credit, has made progress. They've established the FIFA Safeguarding Expert Working Group, on which I sit. I mentioned that before. And my hope and expectation is that this issue will be addressed within this body. But there remains significant distance between policy and implementation across broader sport ecosystem. Across the broader sport ecosystem. Finding 6, and the last finding, which is that prevention works, perhaps the most important finding of all. Community-based education and youth empowerment programs, they show impact in reducing vulnerability. So when young people understand the tactics of deceptive recruitment, when they know their rights, when they have trusted adults and peers that they can turn to, they are harder to deceive and more likely to speak up when something fails or goes wrong. So this is not idealism, this is evidence. So let's talk about what prevention in action looks like. Okay, so I will tell you about what Mission 89 is doing in practice. Our flagship prevention initiative for the past year or two, since 2025, is the Youth Ambassador Program, the YAP, which I've referenced all through the presentation. YAP trains young people from the ages of 14 to 24, within their existing sporting communities to become certified peer educators and anti-trafficking advocates. Not outsiders coming in to lecture, but young people from within the community speaking to their peers in a language that their peers understand, okay? So the program covers recognizing deceptive recruitment, understanding legal rights as athletes, identifying safe and unsafe sport environments, and knowing where and how to speak up to seek help. We currently have cohorts active in Montgomery County, Maryland, in New Jersey through our partnership with the Family Service League, in Toronto, in Monterrey in partnership with Tecnológico de Monterrey, and in Lagos, Nigeria in partnership with Five Stars Football League. I want to pause on that last one to reaffirm and what I mentioned earlier, which is that yes, Nigeria is not a participating nation in the 2026 World Cup, but the reality is that these mega sport events create vulnerability, which is not limited, right, to the host nations and the host cities. It extends way beyond into your communities and into supply talent, and into the global football ecosystem. So Nigerian young athletes, among other national athletes, are among the most recruited and among the most vulnerable, therefore, to fraudulent contracts and trafficking. So protecting them is, or should not be, a side note, but it should be central to it. We're also building, or I would say we have built, a multi-university research consortium with University of Michigan, the University of Toronto, the University of Kentucky, and Tecnológico de Monterrey. And we will be providing a report very soon, probably by the end of the World Cup, on the findings. And we will also be evaluating the impact of the Youth Ambassador Program, and that should should help and contribute to the global evidence base. So the YAP is only one piece of work. Prevention at the scale that is required by a World Cup, an event like the World Cup, that requires a multi-stakeholder framework. Okay, so what we recommend is actions by different stakeholder groups to close these gaps. So for sport federations, We recommend that they adopt explicit anti-trafficking policies, not just safeguarding policies, but policies that name trafficking by name. For law enforcement agencies, it's a must to build these coordination mechanisms between the different, between the organizing committee and the relevant national federations, between civil societies and even academia. There should be a coordination mechanism, and with set protocols and not scrambling when the event or the tournament is already underway. Academia, this is directed specifically to, I imagine, the majority of this audience, must generate evidence that practitioners need, must develop the legal frameworks for athlete protections, must prepare the next generation of lawyers and advocates and policymakers to understand this issue. And civil society organizations like Mission 89, like the partners we work with on the ground, must be resourced adequately to do the community-based work that no government agency can do. Finally, a call to action, because that's what we always do at Mission 89 for all the advocacy events and programming. There must be a call to action, and we always hope that the organizations and the partners that we work with rise to the occasion, and I'm sure that you will all do so in the capacities and with the influence that you have. So I would like to close the substantive section of this presentation with a direct challenge, I would say, and a call to action. Because awareness without action is not enough, right? And this audience of legal scholars, of practitioners, future lawyers, and policy advocates is uniquely positioned to act. And so for academics and legal scholars, I would say, integrate sport trafficking into your teaching. It belongs in human trafficking courses. It belongs in international law courses, in sports law courses. It is a real documented phenomenon, right, with clear legal dimensions and implications. Jurisdiction, victim identification, prosecution, restitution. Give your students the tools to recognize and address it. Conduct research. The governance gap in sport trafficking cannot be closed without evidence. I think we have learned that up to now. And so if you're developing your research agenda in the future, this is a field that is vastly understudied and urgently in need of rigorous scholarship. Partner with organizations like Mission 89. We certainly need the academic community. We need you to be the independent voice that validates and advances our work and the work of civil society and other stakeholders. For sport federations, explicitly, adopt anti-trafficking policies, not just, your generic safeguarding language. Again, policies that name trafficking by name. Define it, establish clear reporting and response protocols, mandate training for, first and foremost, your safeguarding officer or designated safeguarding officer, for your scouts, for your coaches, administrators alike. The gatekeepers of young athletes' sport careers are also usually the people most likely to witness the early signs of exploitation. So they would need to know what to look for. Include anti-trafficking clauses in host city agreements. Every future World Cup, every Olympic bid should carry a specific commitment to trafficking prevention with accountability mechanisms attached. For government and civil society, fund prevention. Not just enforcement, prevention, community-based education, youth empowerment, peer-to-peer programs. Build the coordination mechanisms now. again, June 11th is just, a little while away. But in looking into the future, multi-agency task forces, NGO law enforcement partnerships, venue safe reporting systems, build those coordination units and build them together with the organizing committee and the national, and include the relevant national federations, and ensure as well that your state anti-trafficking action plans on trafficking explicitly addresses the intersections of sport and trafficking, and that every significant country of origin for young athletes does the same. You can advocate for that. You can serve as advocates. In closing, there's a campaign that I'd like to tell you about, that Mission 89 is working with the United Through Sports, UTS, and is supported by the International Organization for Migration, which is also known as UN Migration, IOM. And it's called The Line We Don't Cross. It's a declaration, a commitment by organizations to say zero tolerance to sport trafficking. And we're inviting sport federations, clubs, NGOs, academic institutions, governments, and the private sector, many of whom are sponsoring, supporting sporting events, that they will not stand by while sport is used as a vehicle for exploitation. The line we don't cross is the line between a world in which a child's dream of being an athlete can be exploited and a world in which that dream is protected. The 2026 FIFA World Cup will be watched by over 5 billion people across the world. That is an extraordinary platform. But for the young man that's recruited from a village in Nigeria with false promises of a contract, for the teenage girl whose scholarship turned out to be a trap, for the migrant worker building a stadium in conditions that no labor inspector ever saw, for them, the World Cup is not a celebration unless we make it one. And so I say, and we say, right, sport has the power to protect or to expose also. It has the infrastructure, the reach, and the moral authority to lead on this issue. The question is whether it will. Mission 89 does believe that it will, and we are working every day to make sure it does. And so finally, I would like to close and end this presentation by thanking Professor Dr. Rosa Patti and the John J. Brunetti Human Trafficking Academy at St. Thomas University College of Law for the absolute privilege of contributing to this series. If you would like to learn more about our work, our reports, the Youth Ambassador Program, The Line We Don't Cross, please visit mission89.org. And if your institution wants to join The Line We Don't Cross, we would absolutely welcome you. It will be an honor for you to join. So thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are.